Another expert that I want to call on at this time to talk about particularly the animal impact of the animal industry in North Carolina is Dr. Blake Brown. Dr. Brown is an agriculture and resource economics professor at North Carolina State University. He earned his degree at North Carolina State University. More importantly, he's a North Carolinian through and through. He has a beef cattle farm up in Watauga County, and he spends a great deal of his time at the research campus in Kannapolis, the new research camp, North Carolina Research Campus in Kannapolis. We've relied on in agriculture, we relied on Dr. Brown for many, many years to advise us on a whole host of not just poultry and livestock, poultry and swine, but also tobacco, soybeans, fruits and vegetables. He does a great job for the people of this state. Dr. Brown, come forward. Dr. Blake Brown.
Hey, it's good to be with y'all today. I think the last time I was right here was probably about 3 years ago. I came out and spoke at the Farm City Week dinner, and I've always liked coming out here. I used to do a lot of cotton work years ago, and I would come out to Eden and go to Chowan and Gates counties, and so this is a very interesting part of the state, especially being a mountain boy and coming from the mountains. But today I want to talk to you a little bit about the economic importance of animal agriculture. Dr. Kelly Ziering is primarily responsible for putting this together. Kelly is our extension swine economist. He spends his time thinking about the pork industry and the needs of the pork industry and the economics of the pork industry. And in fact, he's so well known that he was invited this week to Beijing, China, to speak at a conference on World Grain Outlook and talk about the feedstuffs part of that. So that's why Kelly is not here. I said, Kelly, Elizabeth City or Beijing? He said, well, I think I'd rather come to Elizabeth City, but I'd better go to Beijing. So I'm glad to be here in his stead and talk to you about it. As you've already heard today from both the Commissioner and both from Mr. Wooten, animal agriculture is a major component of North Carolina agriculture. As you've already heard, that about $72 billion of our state's gross domestic product or gross state product is attributable to agriculture, and animal agriculture is a big part of that. You've seen this slide a lot. This is one of my favorite slides, though, because when I go places, most people have no idea about the diversity of agriculture that we have in North Carolina. They have no idea how big a part that we play as a state in the nation and even the world economy in terms of animal agriculture. I do have some beef cattle. I like to talk about those. I found Mr. Jackson here. We spent about 5 or 10 minutes talking about Angus cattle when we got here. So I understand, the importance of how it's threaded through our economy. As has been mentioned, livestock make up about 2/3 of our gross farm receipts of about $10 billion. So between $6 and $7 billion of that $10 billion are attributed directly to livestock and poultry. And if you'll see there, broilers 27%, pigs or hogs 23%. We are number 2, if you saw that little card, in the hog industry. And that's something that has happened in the last 25 years. If you had talked to somebody in the nation, particularly somebody in the Midwest in the 1980s, about North Carolina being a major hog producer, they would have smiled at you. In fact, I remember people smile at me about that, because I would tell them, I'd say, North Carolina has some of the most innovative poultry and hog producers in the country. And this was way back in the 80s. I was a livestock agent. And those guys in the Midwest just said, nah, they'll never catch us. Well, guess what? We did. We are number 2 in hog and pork production in the country right now. And the innovations, as I'll mention later, that have happened in the hog industry in the last 25 years to make it much more productive and make us a major supplier not only to the United States of pork, but also to the world, occurred right here in North Carolina. Nope, wrong way. As has been mentioned, and I think I saw that on the card too, we have lots of farms in North Carolina. In fact, in 2007, we had about 52,000 farms. Most of them are small farms. About 45,000 of those would have gross sales of less than, say, $250,000. There's very few corporate farms. I just like the way that the video pointed that out. Most of our farms, well over 90, I think maybe 98% of our farms, are family owned. So we are a state of family farms, even the big farms. If you look at where the farms are located and what they have on them, you'll find livestock on most of our farms in North Carolina. In fact, now I know out here we don't have quite as much livestock as some parts of the farm, but I was looking at the stats before I came. And even here, which was one of our most crop-intensive areas of the state, about a quarter of your gross farm receipts come from livestock and poultry. If you go down to Sampson and Duplin County, you'll see that about 3/4 of their cash receipts come from livestock and poultry. And in fact, those two counties, Sampson and Duplin, account for about $2 billion worth of cash farm receipts in our state, where we have $10 billion. And most of that is livestock, even though they're extremely diverse in what they have. If you look at animal ag across the state, whether it's in the mountains or whether it's down here at the coast, animal agriculture is woven into the whole of agriculture across our state. If you look at broilers, they're pretty widely dispersed. Has anybody ever been up 421 through the foothills through Wilkes County? You see some chicken houses? You saw lots of pasture land, didn't you? And so they're woven together because poultry probably makes up 90% of the cash farm receipts in that county. If you come down to the middle part of the state, Chatham, or even some of the counties down toward the Sandhills, poultry is a very major part of that rural economy and of those farm communities. If you come to the southeastern part of the state, to Duplin or Sampson, you're going to see you're going to see chickens, you're going to see turkeys, and you're going to see hogs. Well, actually, you're not going to see many of them, truthfully, but you're going to see lots of lush cropland, actually lots of pasture land now where these hogs are at. In fact, last year, a story I like to tell folks when they ask, about North Carolina and its livestock industry, I was down at visiting with two brothers who have a large farming operation in the edge of Duplin County. And they were planting sweet potatoes, and they had just planted their tobacco crop. They have about 6,000 acres of crops. And they also, I think if I remember correctly, have about 30,000 sows in terms of different farms scattered around that area. They own a number of farms. And one of the brothers was taking me around, showing me the farms. And he wanted to show me their hog farms. And these guys, the farms were immaculate. They were clean, they were well kept, you didn't have very much odor, and they all had great grassland around them. And me being, a beef cattle person, I started noticing all the beef cows they had around them, and they really hadn't talked much about that. And I said, now you've got 30,000 sows, how many beef cows do you have? And they had all these nice rotational grazing and grasslands where they were irrigating and using the waste from the hog operations to fertilize this. They had 900 brood cows right there. And we go out a lot of places out west. If you go, you don't find that many even on one farm. So we have a diversity, and we have some very large farms as well here. If you look at sort of the average North Carolina farm, the average size is about 164 acres. I meant to look this up before I came, but if I remember correctly, when I was out here and did your Farm City Week banquet, y'all are close to 600 acres on average, I believe. Farms are a lot bigger here in this northeast part of the state. And farmland is really holding its value, isn't it? While the rest of the real estate market has dogged off, that's not been the case for farmland. It's been up and up and up, so it represents a lot of value in our state. And it's just on average, if you average it out, it's probably between $700,000 and $800,000 on average for the value of a farm. Now, if you add a poultry house or a hog house to that, you're going to add somewhere between $200,000 and $1 million. If it's hogs, you may add up to $1.5 or maybe even $2 million to the value of that real estate because of the investment in those facilities. And in fact, according to what Kelly, the statistics he gave me, we have over $1.5 billion in structures for hogs and pigs, and we have about $2.5 billion in structures for poultry. Now, when you go beyond just the direct effects, and this is where it really begins to impact areas like the Northeast here where you raise a lot of grain, is that animal agriculture supports a lot of other industries in our state. If you look at how it supports large feed mills and poultry and pork processing plants, you're talking about a tune of an investment of about $4.6 billion in those processing and feed mills that go to support and go to process that product from these livestock and poultry farms. And you can identify with that because you're one of the big suppliers of feed grains to our livestock industry. As Mr. Wooten mentioned, we only grow about 1/3 of our feed needs here. And that's a big need in our area because it costs money to ship this grain in. And in fact, there's a major effort in our state now and at North Carolina State University in research and extension, working with poultry and hog integrators to try to increase the amount of feedstuffs grown here, looking at other ones like sorghum. So that's a very important place, and that's really a very important niche that you all provide here in this part of the state in supplying that animal industry with feed. Jobs. We've already talked a little bit about how many jobs agriculture furnishes across the state. If you just look at direct jobs for the pork sector, for the pig industry, about 27,000 jobs, direct employment in the North Carolina hog industry. About $2.3 billion in value-added income. The poultry sector is even bigger. Almost 23,000 jobs, direct employment in the poultry industry, and then another 58,000 jobs indirect employment with the poultry industry and supporting industries for that. And so it generates about $7 billion in wholesale product sales and $18 billion in economic activity. So this is big business, and as I mentioned, especially in the case of poultry, it's very widespread across our state, and then it takes a lot of sectors in a lot of different areas to support this industry. It goes into other sectors too. Have y'all heard about the local food movement? It's an interesting movement. It's still a very small part of our agriculture in North Carolina, but it's growing. And the interesting thing is it has reconnected lots of folks that know nothing about agriculture with agriculture. Do y'all have a backyard chicken ordinance in Elizabeth City? You don't have one? The city of Cary now has a backyard chicken ordinance that allows you to keep some chickens in your backyard. This is a big deal. Made the statewide news. I can't believe you hadn't heard about this. Now, those of us that work in production agriculture and grew up on farms may be a little amused about this, but it's very significant. Even though that's tiny, it helps those folks in Cary understand which end of a chicken an egg comes from. Some of them might not have even known that an egg comes from a chicken. But that's very important. And so this local ag movement, which involves being able to buy grass-fed beef at your local farmer's market, or pastured pork, or pastured chicken, or eggs, fresh eggs, those kinds of things have done a very good job of helping people understand, where that food really does come from. Another issue is just how much trade we have in North Carolina. We are a big export state. We export lots of things like tobacco, sweet potatoes, but a big part of our exports are animal products. We have about $2.7 billion in exports back in 2010, and about $1 billion worth of those exports were from livestock and poultry. We export pork, and we export turkeys, and we export broilers to several places around the world. Exports are very important to North American agriculture, and with favorable exchange rates has become even more important. And you can see how our exports, including exports of animal products, have increased over recent years. Now, it's been alluded to about the growing demand globally for food. The Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations estimates that we need to increase our global food supply by about 60% by 2050. So that means all kinds of agriculture, but in particular, it means animal agriculture. Because if you look at Asia, in particular countries like China, where incomes have been improving, people want to go beyond eating rice and beans. They want to be able to add some protein to their diet, meat protein. So these markets are burgeoning and very rapidly growing markets for animal products. Countries like the United States, we're exporting animal products to Asia. Brazil is working hard to compete with us on that. If you go there, you're going to see them trying to keep up with the United States in terms of animal agriculture. And North Carolina is a major part of that. In fact, I was interested to find out when Kelly was doing this presentation, and I was reading some of the stats on it, that meat demanded the quantity of meat demanded in the world is going to increase by 100% by 2050. And I remember a statement that Kelly made about this. He said that basically in the next 40 years, we need to have the same kind of increase in productivity and growth in agriculture that we have had in the entire history of agriculture. And you heard the Commissioner and you heard Mr. Wooten talking about the need for innovation and technology. Well, we're going to have to do that, continue to do that in animal agriculture. We're also going to have to do it in feedstuffs, which you raise a lot of here in this part of the state. We're going to have to continue those productivity increases to keep up with the demand, not just for food, but in particular the demand for protein. The U.S. is already a very major producer of livestock and poultry. We grow about 21% of the world's broilers. We grow a little over 10% of the world's pigs and half the world's turkeys. What about that? And interesting, we have a very small part of the world's population, right? But we're going to be a major supplier and are a major supplier of ag products. And North Carolina is a part of that. Number 2 in pigs, number 2 in poultry in the United States. We have a major share of this animal agriculture and playing a major part in furnishing that for this growing global demand. And as has already been mentioned, technology has to play a major part of that. I think the pork industry here in North Carolina is a prime example. As I mentioned back in the 80s, if you mention North Carolina and pork in national circles, sometimes they kind of smile at you because they really didn't think we could be serious that we were going to surpass some of those big Midwestern states like Iowa or Illinois. But North Carolina was at the forefront of the innovation here, whether it was at the university, and I think at NC State we can take a little bit of credit with that, with our animal science department, our poultry science department, our ag engineering department in terms of waste handling and housing, but also companies like Hog Slats that were innovators and are based, a North Carolina company based out of Newton Grove, and that has become a worldwide supplier of products for the pork industry. Or whether it was in processing of pork products. If you go to the grocery store and you look at animal products, you're going to see some of the biggest names that are also right here in North Carolina, like Tyson Foods, like Purdue, like Smithfield Foods, like Prestige Farms. So we're going to have to continue these kind of technological advances, both in industry and in collaboration with our public universities like NC State University, if we want to meet this growing global demand for protein. One of the big current issues that we have in agriculture, as has been mentioned, is the drought. If you talk to farmers in the Midwest, this has not been a great year for them. It's made it better for some of you because, corn prices are very good right now. It's setting up a very difficult situation for a lot of our livestock farms because they're trying to figure out how they're going to work a profit into this coming year with the way feedstuff prices are. One of the ways that they can do that is through this program that they're trying to get more and more of their feed produced here in North Carolina and not be quite as subject to some of those other markets as they are now. Well, as I finish up, I want you to basically walk away and think about 3 things today whenever you leave this presentation. One is that animal agriculture is a major component of our North Carolina agriculture, about 2/3 of it in fact. And it's a major component of many rural economies as well. It supports many industries and jobs, and you all know that very well because you're major suppliers in this part of the state for feedstuffs for our animal industry. And we have a global presence already, and we can have an even more significant role in this growing global demand for food and in particular for protein. Let me just leave you with a couple of thoughts. The current global trends and challenges that we face provide some really big opportunities for North Carolina. But if we want to participate in that, then we want to look at our policies, how our land use, and how we support our infrastructure of animal agriculture and supporting industries like feedstuffs. And so the question I want to leave you with is how can we, particularly for those of you that are involved in municipal government, how can we ensure that North Carolina agriculture continues to be a sustainable platform for economic growth and jobs in our communities? With that, thank you all very much for allowing me to be here with you. Thank you.